but
Okay, give it a second. Let me know when it does.
okay, here we go.
All right. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is a informational session on unions and the advantages and disadvantages of having one in the workplace. And so this is Art Wheaton, and he is a lecturer at Cornell, and he's very, very knowledgeable in the subject of unions. And hopefully he'll be able to shed some light on whether or not we should have one in our workplace, or any workplace for that matter. And so Art, I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about some of your experience and what you know about unions.
Sure. Well, my name's Art Wheaton. I'm the Director of Labor and Environmental Programs for Western New York for Cornell University. I work for a couple different departments at Cornell University. I work for the Worker Institute at Cornell, and I also work for the Scheinman Institute on Conflict Resolution. So I've been working around unions and with management and non-union companies for the last 20 years at Cornell. Before that, I was at MIT, working to try to help make a lean, mean fighting machine for the aerospace industry. So we work with the unions in aerospace and saying, what's the impact on new production there? And before that, I was at Michigan State University doing labor programs while I was working on my graduate degree at Michigan State.
Excellent.
So one of the things that part of my job is really nice is people want to ask Cornell University, not necessarily me, but they want to have Cornell talk about something.
Mm-hmm.
So I've also been asked to go for the European Foundation for Better Living and Working Conditions, which is one of the groups as part of the European Union,
okay,
one of their government agencies. And they want to know what's labor relations like in the U.S.
Okay.
So they would compare the U.S. So I've been invited to talk about labor relations at different conferences, whether it's at the ILO in Geneva, Switzerland, or Rome, or anywhere you want to go to talk about it. So we try to give a perspective from the ILR extension offices, and I work out of Buffalo, New York, not Ithaca, so I'm not a professor. I was hired to teach workplaces to try to keep them working, both union or non-union.
All right, excellent.
So that's kind of where my background is, and I was hired specifically to be the auto industry expert for Cornell. So I get lots of questions about the auto sector. I was hired to do joint labor management training for UAW Ford, UAW General Motors, all of the different suppliers, to try to talk at the same time for companies and unions. So
very interesting.
It gives me that the ability to have a more balanced approach. So we work with non-union companies, unionized companies, union management, both together. So that's what we try to do. We try to focus on how can we help the workplace. So our tagline is advancing the world of work, is what the logo for ILR has been for years.
Excellent. All right. What would you say that your personal feelings are on a union? Where do you stand? Are they a good thing, a bad thing? Overall, does it maybe depend more upon the type of union or the union, specific union?
Well, I think the title of my talk is advantages and disadvantages of having the union.
That's true.
So that
yes.
It's always a mixed bag, that there's always some good things and there's always some bad things. I would tend to say that since I do a lot of union training, I would be more positive towards a union, but that doesn't mean there aren't risks associated with being with that union. So there can be some disadvantages for what's going on. That you have the great thing for unions saying that we're going to try to help do collective bargaining to give you better pay and better benefits.
Yes.
But it also tries to have a more equality or equitable, where equal pay for equal work. We want to try to have everybody be together, which can mean I'm a superstar, I'm fantastic, I want all the big money. And the answer is, well, here's your job classification, here's what you should be getting. And we have a very narrow range from which we can give you that big raise. Even if you're super great and some of your coworkers you think aren't so super great, why am I getting paid the same? So it can be great to have the union to bring everybody up, but it can also be somewhat of a disadvantage if you are the superstar and you want the 50% raise for mine because I'm wonderful. that lazy person over there, they shouldn't get anything. If you have that kind of mentality, it can be difficult.
I see. Okay.
So there's always an advantage or disadvantage, and there's also some disadvantages for being in the organizing process of trying to start or begin a union. So once you have an established union, then there's a lot more advantages and disadvantages, but there can be some disadvantages because of either ethical or unethical treatment by employers during that process.
Interesting. Okay.
Sometimes they don't like you to try to join a union. They don't like that sharing of power or control.
I see. Okay. What sort of things happen during a union organizing campaign? Like what kind of things would somebody expect to see? I mean, I know that we've experienced some various things that have been going on in the workplace, good and bad, and is it something where employees are oftentimes retaliated against? Because I know that's a big concern when people are trying to organize a union. Is it risky, I guess, to try and start a union from scratch?
Short answer is yes. It is risky. There is a level of risk being involved. When I was going to make these presentations to the European Foundation, I would tell every country, don't ever copy the U.S. labor law because our labor law sucks. It's not very good.
I see.
So that some of the built-in disadvantages, even if you get to the level where you're able to get a union election, even after the election, sometimes those elections could be called into question and they'll try to appeal it.
Okay.
After you even win the election and it's already certified, then you have to negotiate a contract, and that can be very difficult as well, because there's nothing in U.S. labor law that says management ever has to say yes.
Okay, very interesting.
So getting that first contract can be extremely difficult.
Okay.
So it does take courage to do that, and there's a whole variety of movies you can watch for the labor movement. Norma Ray being one for Academy Award winning. Sally Field saying, yeah, it's not always fun and games trying to join a union, but for the most part, most union organizing drives are designed to try to say, how can we try to have more voice in the workplace? How can we have more stable or predictable wages and benefits? And how can we try to improve our lives and improve the workplace? One thing unions don't ever want to do is they don't ever want to hurt the company. There's no reason for a union to try to say, yeah, we want to bring down all your profits.
I see.
No, we want you to make lots of money so you can hire lots more people and pay more money.
That's interesting. Would you say that sometimes a union could actually benefit the employer in some way? Could it actually maybe work out in their favor, and maybe they wouldn't know it initially?
In many cases, yes. So in most cases, there's a lot of advantages for the company to have a union.
Okay.
In that it will typically reduce turnover.
Really?
So that the people will say, I have a good pay, I have good benefits, I have some job security. They can't fire me just because today's Monday. They have to fire me for just cause. And they will have a more traditionally stable work environment. And it's the unions, in the most part, for many in the manufacturing sector. It was the unions that were pushing for having apprenticeship programs, and let's learn about doing trying to train our employees and have education. The unions will push for, well, we want to have continuing education. So if I want to go get my college degree, maybe I can get some tuition assistance. And the union will help in terms of negotiating those benefits, but it also directly benefits the company. If you have the workforce that tends to be happier and tends to want to improve the workplace and not be afraid of saying, gee, we could do this a little bit differently, maybe it could be better.
Interesting.
If you're not unionized, you don't have any of the protections of a grievance process, or you're not willing to speak up. So one big example from history I can bring up is UAW and Ford Motor Company. So if you go back to the history of Ford Motor Company, of when the UAW was trying to organize them, do a Google search and look for Battle of the Overpass. And you can see pictures where the Ford service department, and this is back in the 30s. So this is, their contract was first negotiated in 41. So this is late 30s, early 40s. they actually beat up all of the people trying to organize for a union.
Oh,
They
wow.
actually literally beat them up, and they were able to get someone with a camera actually get some of these pictures.
Wow.
And those
Okay.
pictures actually got into the newspaper, and you see Walter Reuther all bloodied and beat up, and some of the other people trying to organize Ford. Ford did almost a 180-degree turnaround and said, okay, well, if we have to recognize the union, and the public support went towards the union as these pictures came out,
Yes.
Ford has gone on to be one of the best in the auto industry in terms of working with the union, and they credit the union for saving them
Really?
during the 80s. So that if you go back to when we had some oil crises, and I apologize for having my examples be auto, because that's what I'm the auto guy, but
It's okay.
they saved the company because some of the contracts they couldn't, when we were getting more Japanese imports and more imported cars and with better fuel economy,
Yes.
Ford was in big trouble and said, we can't pay our next pay increases.
Okay.
And that's when they negotiated the profit sharing. So
Okay.
instead of having all of those differences and saying, okay, you don't have to guarantee pay us all of this.
Okay.
If you're making big money, then give us a little bit of the profits and we'll do profit sharing. But Ford went on the record with all of their leadership saying the UAW saved Ford. They were the ones who did it.
Okay.
And if you look at the bankruptcies for GM and for Chrysler, Ford didn't go bankrupt, so that they learned that the union can be a strategic strength.
Interesting. Okay, that is very interesting.
But I don't remember you introducing yourself, so you're here.
Oh yes, I forgot about
Talk
that.
about me and my big mouth. But,
no, that's all right. Okay, so my name is Nick Slajona, and I am currently employed at ST Genetics, which is a cryogenics lab located in Ithaca, New York. And I'm doing this because our workplace is currently in the middle of a union organizing campaign. I'm working with a couple other people, and we're trying to unionize the workplace. Me in particular, I've told some of the management this, that I'm not so much interested in workplace safety, and I mean, it is important. Don't get me wrong, but my focus is mainly on layoffs and firings, and I think that I would like to see, I guess, a workplace where people feel like they at least have some sort of a roadblock in the way, where they can't just be laid off, kind of just at random, maybe not at random, but just kind of, like unexpectedly, or, if people just want to go into work every day and feel comfortable that they're going to have the job the next day. And so that's my main concern. The other organizers, they may have different concerns than me, but that's kind of my focus, and so that's kind of why I'm here.
So in terms of trying to do that, that's the reason currently for today in September 2019, the UAW is on strike against General Motors.
Yes.
And one of the biggest issues are the temporaries. So they have about 7 to 10% temporaries there, and they're on strike to try to protect the temporaries who could go, they worked there for 3 or 4 years, and at any minute, bang, they're gone. So it makes it very difficult to buy a house if you go to get your mortgage and say, okay, where do you work? Well, I'm a temp. Oh, don't want to even talk to you. And it stops right there. So that having some security, the biggest advantage, if we're talking about advantages of having a union, is if you get a collective bargaining agreement or a union contract. Most union contracts will have what they call a just cause provision, which means that the employer can fire you only for just cause. And you have a grievance procedure in place where if you're not happy with the way things are going, I will go to a union steward or a representative and we can file a grievance. And that grievance has a process in place where you go through maybe 3 or 4 steps in the grievance procedure, and then it goes to arbitration. So that the final decision on whether you get to keep your job or lose your job is going to be on a neutral third party that doesn't belong to the union, doesn't belong to the company, and it's seen as a neutral or an arbitrator saying, let me hear the evidence in this case and see whether or not you had a reasonable excuse or justification for firing somebody. Because in the United States, if you don't have a collective bargaining agreement, so if you don't belong to a union, then you can be fired because it's Monday, because I don't like I had
No.
a bad hair day, you can be fired, and you can be fired for any reason except if you get fired based on your race, your religion, your gender, or your veteran status. There's these Title VII rules that you could
Okay.
sue. So if you fired me because my religion was something or other, then I could sue you in court.
Yes.
Not through the union, but through court, saying that you violated my civil rights, and I want to sue you for doing that. So if you don't fire me for my race or religion or other protected status, you know, the Handicap or Americans with Disabilities Act, one of those violations, then I can fire you for whatever reason I want.
I see.
And the union gives that grievance procedure where it doesn't mean they save everybody, but you at least get a hearing.
Okay.
You get to say, let's talk about this and do that. So it's one of the most important things. More important than the wages and benefits are actually having the just cause provision and a grievance procedure. Yeah, in my opinion, it is. In that it doesn't guarantee you keep the job. It means that you have to have some sort of understanding that here are the reasons or justifications for you losing your job. It could be, you know, we're going bankrupt or we're losing lots of money and we need to do layoffs. And there's a lot of times will be a layoff provision where you can say, well, we're going to lay off those with the lower seniority first. So when you talk about some of the disadvantages of a union is if you are a brand new hire, you may not get first choice on when you can take your vacation because the more senior folks, they may get to say, well, I want the day after Thanksgiving off because I want to go Black Friday shopping. And if the facility needs to be having people there, the newer hire may not be able to get that day. So it can be an advantage or a disadvantage.
Now, is that something that could be negotiated into a contract? Like, let's say that our employees want to form a union and they don't want to have like a seniority clause, or maybe they do want to have one. Is that something that the employees could talk about and they could decide for themselves collectively, we don't want this provision. You know, we want the company to be able to, you know, lay off someone that is most senior or least senior. Is that something that we have a choice on and we have a voice on?
That is something that is negotiable. So that you negotiate the union becomes the exclusive bargaining agent for all wages, hours, and terms and conditions of employment. So you can negotiate it. The only things you can't negotiate are things that violate the federal, state, or local law.
That makes sense.
So as long as what you're negotiating doesn't break the law, you can bargain pretty much whatever you want.
Oh, interesting. So one of the things that the Union Buster came in and told us was that the whole concept of a just cause clause was kind of a moot point. And the reason he said that is because, for example, we have OSHA. OSHA protects people from workplace violations where, you know, maybe even he suggested that they could do an even better job than the union could at workplace safety. And he said, you know, in the terms of firings and layoffs, people have the option that they can, you know, call up a lawyer and you know, say, well, I was fired and you know, just come up with a reason. I think it was because of my religion, you know, that kind of a thing. Like, is that something? Would you agree with that, or would you disagree with that?
I would disagree strongly on the health and safety component. That it's great we have OSHA, and I've done training with OSHA reps and people that actually do those types of things. And I think OSHA has limited resources. They're not at every job site. But if you have a union there and you have a health and safety committee, which is another one of those mandatory subjects of bargaining you want to have. Then the union can say, well, hey, I saw this, and then I can write a grievance. In a grievance, people always try to think it's a penalty. It's not. A grievance is something that tells you something needs to have some attention, and it's an opportunity to improve the workplace. So the grievance could be, hey, we don't really like standing on the top of a ladder and reaching over 5 feet to try to do something. We actually would like to have the ability to have a safety harness or something. So you don't want to say, well, it's okay because OSHA was here 2 years ago and they looked at it. So it's like, no, I really don't want to stand up there and have that fear of dying.
No, you're absolutely right.
If I'm dead, agree. My family can sue saying that it was stupid to have me do that, but you really want to have that.
I see.
Nothing having a union takes away any of your legal obligations or your legal rights to sue. So
Okay.
you still have that right to sue, but
Okay.
it gives you more opportunities to improve the workplace. And
Okay.
for health and safety in particular, it's good for the company. You don't want employees getting hurt. That can impact your workers' compensation. It can
Okay.
impact the long-term penalties for things.
Okay.
So you want to try to make sure that health and safety is one of the key advantages for having a union, where you feel that you are able to point out some areas in the
Okay.
workplace that could use some
Okay.
attention. So health and safety, I think, is a
Hmm.
big advantage for doing that.
Okay. Let's see here. That was a concern. So I'm just seeing if there's any questions coming up on the feed.
So while you're looking
Okay.
on the feed, let me go over a couple statistics in there and go ahead and check, because it's important
Oh,
for
yeah.
our live audience in place. In terms of just some of the numbers, so the Bureau of Labor Statistics did some research every year on some of the numbers for unions, and currently there's public sector workers are about 33.9% or almost 40% unionized. And that's
Okay.
about 5 times higher than the private sector, which is about 6.4%. So the highest unionization rate is in the public sector, smaller for the private sector. And got some questions that's in there.
Okay. So another point that the union buster was trying to make was in terms of strikes. He was trying to get across the point that a strike could be a very detrimental thing to the employees. He was trying to push this idea that if there is an economic strike in particular, that people could be able to, they would end up losing their jobs. They would be replaced by temporary workers. They can be forced to strike by the union. And if they don't strike, then they can be fined by the union. He pushed this topic very heavily, and I think it actually scared a lot of people.
Sure.
And I don't know if that's something you've seen unions do a lot.
Strikes are not all that common because, number one, nobody wins in a strike. The union doesn't win in a strike. Management doesn't win in a strike.
Okay.
It puts your job at risk. So if you're not working, making product or providing services, that hurts the company. And if you're not working, then you're not getting your hourly wage. So strikes hurt everybody. Sometimes they're necessary, but the union cannot by law go out on strike without having a strike authorization vote. So before you go into contract bargaining, you have to take a poll or a vote of the membership saying, yes, we give the bargaining committee the right to go out on strike should they feel it's necessary. It doesn't mean we want you to go out on strike. So usually a strike authorization vote will be like 95 or 99%, which says the ability to strike is an important tool to have, but it's not one that you ever want to use. It's kind of the nuclear option, last resort, because it hurts both sides. It hurts the union because you're not making your wages, and it hurts the company because they're not making product. And if they're not making money, then you have less money to pay your workers. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. And for most part, you will spend some time on the picket line trying to do the protest. But I don't think strikes in and of itself are something that any union wants to look at as a first step. It's kind of a last resort. But it does give a little bit of a balance of power, because there's 2 kinds of strike according to the law. You can have an economic strike, which was the question that you said. And if I go out on strike because I want better pay or better benefits, that's an economic strike.
Yes.
So the company would have the right to hire permanent replacements, and they could permanently replace all of the workers. If I go out in a strike for an unfair labor practice, which could be health and safety, which we talked about, or it could be the union or the company not bargaining in good faith, and you say, hey, you're breaking the law here, we're going on an unfair labor practice strike, then they are not allowed to hire permanent replacements. So nobody wants to go out on strike. It's an option of last resort, but the ability to threaten not just whether you want to work here or not work here, but the money or the revenue coming in for the company, nobody wants to strike. Everybody loses.
Okay, very good to know. So the union buster, I know I call him a union buster, but his official title was a union consultant. Would you say that the information that was given by him was truly unbiased as he claimed that it was? Like we've been told that during many of the presentations and meetings by this consultant that he was giving the facts surrounding union, the quote unquote facts. Do you think that, when he says that he was truly unbiased, I mean, in your experience, is that something that is true usually, or is he really just one-sided and just looking to stop the whole thing?
Well, I don't know. I haven't met him, so I can't really say for sure whether he is one-sided or not, but we all have a bias one way or the other. So
Okay.
We're not completely and totally neutral on anything. And just having the title union consultant, does he work for unions to try to help them? Or is he an anti-union consultant, which is what I think his services are. And there's a lot of groups. And the reason they have a lot of these law firms or consultants come in to try to break it up is that the union gives you the power of collective bargaining, which means you have some say in how things are done in the workplace. So you have the right to negotiate over some of the working conditions. And that can be real scary for a lot of companies. They say, no, I want to be able to do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want. And the union can't really block anything, but they can say, well, let's talk about that and let's negotiate it and let's see it from more than one side. And a lot of companies are afraid of the collective bargaining power that the unions have to be able to negotiate on behalf of lots of people, saying, no, we really think we should get a pay increase. We really think that you should share some of those revenues. So a lot of times it's the fear of management to have full control and autonomy to do what they want. So before unions became more popular in the 30s, in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, unions were seen as a way to save the United States. So they had the National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act, saying the president of the United States was saying, we think unions are our best hope to get us out of this Great Depression because they can help all of our companies. And now, since 1947 and the Taft-Hartley Act for the right to work states and some of the other things, they're seen as, no, we don't want them too powerful. So everyone has kind of a bias one way or the other, but for the most part, it is the workers or the employees that always have the last say. They get a chance to say, let's ask them. You get a chance to vote. So it's not Nick saying, we're going to have a union and I'm the only one and you get to do it. It's like, no, you got to convince more than half of the people working there that they're in agreement with you. And
that's a good point.
Risk with that? And the answer is yes. They're bringing in all of these union busting consultants coming in here to have closed door meetings, and we're going to lock you in this room and tell you and scare you to death and have you scared straight for trying to see these terrible, horrible, awful union folks are going to do it. And who's the union? It's all of those people around you that are working there. That's the union, and that's what most people don't understand. It's not these people coming in from Washington, D.C. or New York City with a trench coat and machine gun saying, we're the union. It's like, no, the people that vote 50% plus one, so more than half, that's the union. That's the people that bargain the contract. That's the people that do the grievance procedure. They're the ones that say, we've been here for 10 years. We want to do things better. How can we try to do that better? So the union are the employees. It isn't some other people coming in from out of town or outer space. It's just people.
Why would you think that a company would be so opposed to having a union in the workplace? Like our employer also. What are the reasons behind them bringing in a union buster to stop this from happening? What are they afraid of?
Well, a lot of times they're afraid of collective bargaining in general. They're afraid that the workers will be able to join together to do anything. So instead of me as the employer being able to pick favorites and pay who I want, however I want, fire who I want, whenever I want, the union puts in place some provisions in the collective bargaining agreement that means you have to talk about some of those decisions. It doesn't mean the union can block any of those decisions, but you at least have to talk about them. And one of the other reasons could be the pay or benefit differences. So non-union workers in the US as of 2018 make about $860 per week, whereas the unionized folks make about $1,051. So that it's a significant difference. So if you're non-union, on average, you're making 82% or 82 cents on the dollar than what the union is. Of course, there's always a lot of things to talk about for statistics, like, well, the unionized jobs. If you think about what are the unionized jobs, what jobs do we think are important or cool, or if you have kids, you would like your kids to do. And you could say, I want them to be a doctor. Well, they're part of the medical association and they're part of that. So it may not technically be a union, but you have to pay your medical dues and your medical fees. So it's like a union. Lawyers belong to the bar. So you got to be a member of the bar, which is like a union. You talk about the airline pilots, they are going to be unionized, nurses. And if you go down the list, even if you say, well, I don't want to do that. I want to be a actor and be like The Rock or somebody. I'm going to be Dwayne Johnson and make all that super big money for that. Well, he also belongs to a union, as does the director and the cinematographer and all of the people that are doing the makeup and the IATSE folks that try to set up all of those stages.
Mm-hmm.
All of those jobs doing what we think of as cool, interesting, or exciting, they're unionized. And if you think about baseball and hockey and football, they're all unionized to try to protect their members and see if they can get better pay or better benefits. And
interesting.
They don't want to share that.
Okay. So another thing that our union buster was trying to get a point, the point he was trying to get across is that unions are basically a scam that exists really just to collect money and collect dues from the members, and really at the end of the day not do a whole lot for the people. I mean, is that something that's true or false in this case, that unions are really just concerned with getting as many members as possible to collect dues, just like any business would?
Well, dues are important, but I wouldn't say that's their only reason. So I don't think that you're trying to help get a union at your workplace to get this huge millions of dollars in dues. A lot of times, what are the dues? Average in the U.S. is about 2 hours of pay per month.
Okay.
So if you're working 2,080 hours a year, you're talking 24 hours of that would be your union dues. And what do you get for those union dues? You get people to actually negotiate a collective bargaining agreement for you. You get someone to help process your grievances. You get a union steward to try to help you try to look for health and safety concerns. They're not making huge, big dollars in doing this. This is providing services that are in there. So we have about 7.2 million union members in the public sector, but we have even more in the private sector. There's 7.6 million, but the percentages are lower. So so it's a matter of the number of people or, the percentages. So the percentages tend to go down, but you have a lot of members. You got, almost 15 million people that are union members. So you do get some money for that, but the other thing that scares a lot of employers or a lot of people, especially elected officials, is unions tend to have a larger voting block. So that you could say, I'm not just speaking on my behalf, I'm speaking on behalf of 300 members or 500 members, and I'm going to have them members not just vote. The unions tend to be in the community. They tend to do more volunteering. They tend to do more in contributions to charities, and they are also able to have networks of people where we want other people to vote for people that have similar views or interests of helping the middle class or the working class, because by definition you're going to be working class if you're belonging to a union, because it's not really, the executives and CEOs don't tend to belong to the union, but it's usually people that have to work for a living that are doing that.
Are there any checks and balances in place when it comes to a union? What would hold a union accountable? How do I know that they'll have our best interests at heart?
Well, for advantages and disadvantages of a union, they are elected. Unions are democratic organizations, not in Democrat Republic, but you have to act Republican. You have to actually vote for the union leadership. So if they are not doing their job to help your membership, then you vote in new people. So that can be great, where just like you turn over the president or the senators or House of Representatives or even your local school board, that the union leadership is voted on. It's a democratic organization. The problems, a disadvantage for having a democratically voted organization, is the person who's popular could get voted in, not necessarily the one who's the most qualified. We know that would never happen in Congress or in politics, but the unions do have to get elected for those positions. And if they're not doing their job, you vote them out. And there's also a lot of labor law that says here are all the rules the unions have to follow, and you have to file all of these forms for the IRS, and you have to report to the Department of Labor, and you have to have union meetings, and you're going to try to have the membership be in charge of watching over the union, because the membership is the union. Too many people see the union as this outside group. So how much money did my paying my dues make the union do for me? And the answer is no, you are the union. You're paying the dues because you are the union. So it's a lot more like a worker cooperative or like a federal credit union. You are the bank, you are the co-op, and you are the union, so that you have to be able to say, how can we help our workplace? And if they're not helping you, vote out the leadership.
Okay. So I have another question from one of my coworkers. She asks, will any of my rights be taken away if I join a union? I'm concerned that I will have no say in a contract negotiation, and the union will just sort of do whatever it wants. We've been told many times that if contract negotiations fail, then the union will oftentimes approve a contract, even though the majority of workers have voted no to that contract.
Well, part of the contract process is you have to elect the negotiating committee. So you're going to put in place to bargain that contract the people that you want to bargain for you. So the membership gets to vote and choose who it is. Even after they come up with that agreement, a tentative agreement, then you have to bring it back to the membership and they have to ratify it. So then they have to vote again on the contract itself saying, do we agree with all this stuff? If they don't agree with all that stuff, if you got more than half saying, we don't like this, so you didn't get enough in wages or you gave away a benefit or a right we wanted, they can say, we're voting no, then the contract is not ratified, and then they have to go negotiate a new one. So the workers pick the union representative, and the union has to present those results of the bargaining for their tentative agreement back to the membership, and they have to vote to ratify it. So I would say they don't take away all your rights, that you pick who you want to represent you. It's not easy to have, okay, we're going to have 500 people working in this place. Let's have 500 people around the bargaining table and try to keep that all in one place. So you pick the representative, and that's why it's called collective bargaining, so that you pick the representative. So I don't think it takes away anybody's rights at all, because everyone has a right to pick the member who negotiates and ratify whatever the results are.
The union consultant also stated numerous times that employees who collectively bargain could actually end up with a contract with less benefits and less pay. Is that true? Is that something that you've seen happen?
Well, it's like we said before, if you are the superstar and if you're great, you might have been able to negotiate more on your own individual behalf. So that if you have a union, the union has to bargain for all of their members, so that you may end up with less as an individual, but as a collective, you will almost always come up with more having a union as opposed to not having a union. Because you don't really see Walmart or McDonald's saying, out of the goodness of our heart, we're going to give everybody lots of pay and lots of extra benefits. It's usually something that they will do what they need to do, but they won't do a whole lot extra beyond that. So the union will help you do better at the bargaining table, which is one of the reasons why management doesn't want them there. So management doesn't want to have to negotiate. They want to be able to say, I'm going to do what I want. That's all you get. Minimum wage, that's it. Take it or leave it. And you have to remember, in the United States, there are no legal requirements for any vacation time. It's not a legal requirement. You don't have to provide paid health insurance. So they may have to pay a penalty for the Affordable Care Act, but they don't have to give you any of that. There's no paid maternity leave in the United States. So almost every other industrialized country in the world thinks that that's important, but not in the US. It's not a requirement. So you only get what you negotiate.
Now, we have a lot of younger people in our workplace, and a lot of them have been going to their older peers to find out information about unions and whether they're good or bad. I'm not sure some of the information that they're getting, but my question is, has the perspective on unions changed from 20, 30 years ago? You know, the older generation experienced a different kind of union than what younger people would be experiencing if they were to join a union today?
In some ways, yes. So if you go back to around 1980 or so, there was a strike from the air traffic controllers. The name of the union was PATCO, so it was the air traffic controllers strike. And during that strike, during Ronald Reagan was the president, they went out on strike for better pay and better benefits, but mostly it was because of the stress at work of trying to have airplanes not crash all the time. And the government under Ronald Reagan fired all of those that were on strike and said, not only are you fired, you're not allowed to work in any federal government agency for the rest of your life. You're out of here. And it became more popular to say, oh, we can squash the unions and that's okay. So if you were talking about the older generation being working before the 80s, then they may have had more collective bargaining power at the table. But what you've seen now is you've seen decades of companies in the gig economy and the rise of the temporaries, and a lot of people are more at risk. The favorability towards unions is at a high of almost 50 years. So we're at about 64% view unions as favorable now, which is almost the highest it's been in 50 years.
What would you say, what are the reasons for that?
I think a lot of people are starting to figure out that they don't raise the minimum wage unless you fight for it. So they don't raise your pay and benefits unless you fight for it, and they fire you whenever they want. So a lot of people are being impacted by the younger workers and their jobs. They're not getting the job for life that their parents or their grandparents may have had, where you had a collective bargaining agreement in place that said, we're not going to fire you unless you screw up. So if you screw up, of course you can get fired. But now we can just say, oh, we're going through a restructuring. We're going to reorganize. We're downsizing. And a lot of people no longer have that sense of job security. So it's employment security is what is really scaring a lot of people today. Because if you want to try to buy a house and you want to try to buy a car, they say younger folks don't want to drive a car. The answer is they may not be able to afford one because you got to get the car, the insurance, and all this other things. And it's like, I don't make enough money for my current job because I'm not, in that mid-career track to be able to make enough money to do that. So I think a lot of people want to have a car. They just may not be able to afford that because cars are going up in price.
I see.
Insurance.
So one of the things that the union buster pointed out in his talk was that the union constitution for the union that our organizing committee is working with, which is the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, that's the group that we're trying to work with. And they've been doing an excellent job. And they have a constitution that states, and Pat the union buster pointed this out to us, that there's a clause that allows for executives' legal fees to be paid for if he or she gets in trouble with the law. Is this true? Like, is this something that you've seen in a union constitution that if someone, like, let's say the executive gets in trouble for using drugs or dealing with drugs, would their lawyer fees be paid for? Is that something that we should be concerned with, that our dues are just going to go toward paying for people's, like cleaning up people's, own problems that they cause for themselves?
Well, I can say for the most part, most union leaders are not going to be involved in that or use the union dues money for that. And that's not saying it's never happened, but is it possible that if you're on a strike or if you're trying to represent the workers on a picket line and then the police are trying to say, hey, you blocked this truck, can you get arrested? Well, if you get arrested for leading an organized picket, which is legal, and then you get arrested, should you have the right to have an attorney to do that? And the answer is yes. If the company, some companies will try to bankrupt the union by making them take every single complaint to arbitration or try to say, well, we're going to try to block this or do that. So you do need to have access to some legal help in our system in the United States. But for the most part, I don't think this is done so that they can lead extravagant lifestyles, because the union is the members of the same company. So it's your coworkers. And if one coworker is going off and doing a lot of ridiculous stuff, then you're going to vote them out of office and saying, we don't really trust you anymore. That went to your head. So we want to have somebody different. But I don't think there's a problem with having a union have a clause to help pay legal fees related to your union duties. I don't think if they had a union leader get arrested for kidnapping or murder, I don't necessarily think that's what the union legal fund is going to be able to do, but they should be able to help you if you have legal issues related to your collective bargaining agreement.
Okay. Okay, so we are going to have an election coming up in a few days in our workplace to certify whether or not people want to have this union. Is this actually going to be completely anonymous? Is this something that people should be concerned about, that management might find out which way they voted one way or another?
Well, they need to know who gets the chance to vote, not necessarily how the individual voted. So you're not going to be able to have the same person vote 10 times. So they're going to need to know who voted. But it's going to be blind, where you won't be able to know whether you voted for the union or against the union. And that's the way that they're supposed to be run. So it's a free democratic election where you say, you go in your voting booth and vote how you want in your piece of paper, or however your system is set up for that. But no, I don't think so. And if it did happen where you got retaliated for how you're going to vote, then you can also sue for, retaliation by the employer, which is an unfair labor practice, which is illegal. But that once again goes to some of the disadvantages of a union, that it can be difficult to prove and it can be expensive to go through that process. But there are some risks involved, so that I don't want to blow sunshine and say, hey, you know what, it's all fun and games and all a lot of fun. Employers can fire people for trying to be favorable to a union, and they will try to do that to block it. So they can, sometimes some of the union busting law firms will say, fire the organizer and whoever's leading this charge and get rid of them first, and then let them fight it out in the courts for 2 or 3 years. And if we got to hire them back, that's fine. But in the meantime, nobody wants to vote for the union because everyone they saw trying to organize it's been fired. So
interesting.
So some employers will play hardball, and it's not unheard of to have them do that. So hiring the union buster law firm, I'm assuming that they're going to get paid more for trying to block the union than probably a couple years worth of union dues. So that what you're paying for the 2 hours, a month, they're paying a whole lot more for that for the legal fees. So for 1 hour of the attorney's time, you're probably going to have like 50 people's union dues.
How much do unions usually charge a worker in dues?
It's 2 hours per month.
2 hours
is what is standard or typical, but that doesn't mean that they can't ask for more or less. They try to cover the costs of doing collective bargaining. A lot of unions will also try to separate, and they have to by law separate, any of the contributions that are for political activities, because unions will help, try to do election campaigns to help locally elected officials, but by law they have to have a PAC or political action committee that's separate dues. So if I'm not interested in supporting the person running for Republican or for Democrat or independent, I don't want to do that, then I don't pay to that political action fund, and I only pay my 2 hours per month towards the union dues. So they are separate. So you only pay for for the services that you are getting, but it usually makes a lot more money for you to have more security in the workplace by having the union than the dues. The dues are not a big amount.
Is it possible that in a negotiated contract that a pay increase could be included in there to make up for the dues that people would have to spend? Is that something that happens sometimes?
Well, usually the union dues are kind of standard for what you have, and that would be part of it, but you negotiate the wage increases separately. So if you get a pay increase, it's in the union's best interest to get as many pay raises as they can, because it's not a flat dollar amount, it's based on your hourly pay. So if I can get you a 10% pay increase, then my dues just went up by 10% because that was the 2 hours worth of pay. So it's built in to be, in both interests. It's in my interest as an individual employee for the union to negotiate a higher pay rate, and it's in the union's interest if they get more union dues to get you a higher pay increase.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps you.
How could workers remove a union from the workplace if they weren't happy with the union that came in?
It's a similar process as trying to elect and try to get one. You have to do what's called a decertification. So you have to have another election, and you have to have another election to have a certain number of people, at least 50% plus one, saying we're voting to remove this union. In some cases, it's to change the individual union. In many cases, you have to decertify that union, and then you would have a new union election to see which other union you would have. But it doesn't happen very often. It happens, but not very often. Usually, the unions have the best interest of their members at heart because the union are the members. It's the workforce. That's who makes it up. So,
when creating a new collective bargaining unit, what are some of the things that people want to look for when joining an existing organization?
It's tough for doing it because usually it's the NLRB or the Department of Labor that will help determine, and they will define what your bargaining unit is. You may ask them, but the employer will also try to change that. And in some cases, like McDonald's, there has been big fights over do I organize the individual McDonald's or do I have to organize all of the McDonald's in the United States? So organizing an individual McDonald's may not be as difficult as trying to say, now you have to organize every McDonald's in the entire United States, and determining what is or is not a bargaining unit can be a big one. There has been recent changes under the National Labor Relations Board, which for the private sector is the government agency for trying to monitor that. It has become harder for smaller bargaining units. So let's say you have skilled techs at your cryogenic facility that are, I'm a special scientist, I got to deal with liquid nitrogen or whatever you're working with, and only those people we want to have the union because they're really special or technical. But the employer will say, no, you got to get everybody in the entire facility, and all of our facilities, not just in this location, if we have another location. So that's another thing that you don't individually define what the bargaining unit is. It has to be determined as you have your elections. So someone from NLRB probably told you how many people are eligible to vote, so that they can know, well, if you have 100 people, that means 51 have to vote yes for the union.
Yes. Okay, so some of the paperwork that the Union Buster handed out to us was it was hard to grasp whether or not you can even believe it. Like for example, I have this one article that he handed to everybody that it says that unions can lie about the law. It says here that it is well settled, however, that misrepresentations as to the law are treated in the same manner as other misrepresentations. The board will not set aside an election based on the misrepresentations contained in campaign propaganda. So is that true that unions are allowed to lie about the law?
Well, the law is pretty much the law, that you can look it up online, you can talk to an attorney, you can do it. So I don't think that the union or the company on either side can lie about the law, that the law is what the law is. So I don't think the unions intentionally misrepresent what is the law, but the law is also open to interpretation. So a lot of collective bargaining and the grievances and the fights that you have is not necessarily whether you broke the law or didn't break the law. It's how do we interpret the language? And there's a lot of people who will try to twist it in their favor. So I don't think the union intentionally tries to say it's legal or illegal, but the union would not have the power to change the law. So the union cannot negotiate anything that violates a federal, state, or local law. So the union can't twist the wording to change the law, and they can't negotiate against the law.
Okay. So I remember another thing that the Union Buster pointed out was that currently in the private sector, the number of, or the percentage of the workforce that is currently unionized is something in the range of 6 to 7%. Why is that? Why it seems like it's very low at this point in time, and I'm wondering, is it something where people don't like unions, they don't want to join them, and they're just kind of leaving them in droves, or what is causing there to be such a low number of unionized workers in the United States?
Well, currently in the United States, in the private sector, it's 6.4%. So it's 7.6 million people. So there's still quite a few people in unions, but as a percentage, we keep adding about 100,000 or so jobs every month to the workforce for the total workforce, so that people are not leaving the unions in droves. They've actually had many years where they're actually increasing in the total number of members, but as a percentage of the workforce, it goes down. So I don't think people are leaving in droves, but what has happened is you've seen a lot of jobs in the manufacturing sector going away to Mexico or China. Mm-hmm. So that you no longer have, I'm in Buffalo, so we used to have Trico. So Trico made all the windshield wipers, and windshield wipers were invented in Buffalo. Now none of them are made here. They're all made in Mexico or China. Then you have other companies like American Axle had 3 plants here in Buffalo, and now none of them are here. They're all gone. They moved out of Detroit. So those jobs, so that means union jobs left. It wasn't that they quit the union. The company left the United States.
Is that something that we should be concerned about? If the workplace were to unionize, is there a large possibility that the company would just see it as too expensive to, keep in operation, and they would just pack up and leave? Is that something we should genuinely be concerned about?
It's something that could happen. So I'm not going to tell you that if you increase your wages and benefits, that they're not going to look for a place with lower wages or benefits. So if you go back into the 90s or the 80s, you had Ross Perot running for president, and he said, if you pass NAFTA, you're going to hear this giant sucking sound of all of the jobs going to Mexico. And for a certain extent, that happened. You did see large numbers of people go to Mexico, and now it's China, and now we're having all these trade wars with China for what's going on. So they could go to a lower wage group. But if you're in a technical field for what it sounds like your organization is that something you really want to move someplace else? Is there a certain amount of infrastructure put in place where you had to build all of the technology and equipment? And a lot of people like to complain that the cars cost way too much money, but the amount of what they pay for the workers to build the cars for the UAW is about 5% of the price of the car. So 95% are other things. So do you really want to move that location for savings of only a 5 or 10% of the cost of building them there? So the employees are not the highest cost. For a restaurant, that one is a higher cost is going towards the employees to try to run that. So it depends on what you're making or what you're doing. You could have higher labor costs, but if you're in manufacturing or a technical area, you probably have a lot more you're spending on your chemicals that you're using to do that, and the equipment you need to monitor it and all the safety things. And if they were moving to a new location, would it be just for lower wages, or would it be for less restrictions on the environment? So are there a lot of environmental issues that they're afraid of, so that we don't make tennis shoes in the United States because the glues they use for the soles to stick on there are really bad for you and kill you and cause all sorts of permanent problems. So they don't want to make the shoes here in the US because they want to be able to kill people in other countries making them. And why would we want to destroy our own folks when we can try to ship our problems to another country for environmental or health and safety concerns? So I don't think forming a union will have the company move.
Okay. Now, what about New York State? I understand that New York State is a very pro-union state. I believe it has the most number of, or maybe even the second largest number of unionized workforce in the country. What are the reasons for that? Why is New York State so good at attracting people to union membership?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily they're good at attracting people into union membership, but it was seen as manufacturing. So in Buffalo, Buffalo has a lot of union members, and the union members in Buffalo have higher incomes than the non-union members. They make more charitable contributions than non-union members. They tend to volunteer and do things for a good cause than other non-union members. So that in New York State, the group seems to feel more empowered to affect change. There's a lot of good things about belonging it, and the study was done by Russell Weaver and the Buffalo Niagara Union members, Good Neighbors and Active Citizens. New York had a lot of manufacturing and good. New York had the ability to have public sector workers as well belonging to unions. So the right to work states tend to have a lot fewer workers, and those tend to be along the same Civil War, very Dixie line, Mason-Dixon line is as part of what a lot of the right to work states were. And that was done a lot along the same reasons for the Civil War. So there was, do a search sometime on some of the history of right to work and how that came about. And you'll see that it's an ugly history of where that came from. So New York State, being from the North, tended to have more unions to protect the workers. The South tended to say, we don't want to have any of the African Americans or slaves to have any kind of say in the workplace. So we're going to stay non-union, so we don't have any of the undesirables become union members. So a lot of the Mason-Dixon line for the Confederacy and slavery, that's a lot of how that right to work came about, was trying to not allow workers. And even today we have, as a percentage, not a lot higher, but there's the highest percentage of union members is African American by a small amount.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
that there was legitimate reasons for people to be concerned, because a union doesn't care about your color. They care about having you work at the job with dignity.
Interesting. Okay. So I have an online question here. Let me see. It says, from Anonymous, unions have gotten press for being corrupt lately. How do unions prevent their leadership from stealing from their members and prevent corruption in general moving forward?
Unions have had problems with corruption in the past. It's not a common problem. There's currently some folks at the UAW that are, I think there's 9 of them that have been indicted in terms of for doing that. But out of 400,000 UAW members, you had 9 people get in trouble with the law. The percentages aren't that high. Is it a problem? Yes, it's a problem if your membership can't vote the people in or vote the people out. For the Teamsters, if you go back many years ago, for Jimmy Hoffa, there was problems with organized crime. But I don't think it's a common or a typical thing, because you get to vote for who you want as the union leadership and the union members. And for the most part, people just want a job. So if you go back to the original founders of unions in the United States, what do we want? Well, we want to have enough money to support our families, and we want to have public schools. It was the unions that actually got public schools in the United States. It was the unions that got health insurance in the United States. It was the unions that got the 40-hour a week in the United States. The unions also did the unemployment. So if you look at it, the unions just want to typically just help all workers. But does that mean that some people have not taken advantage of it? Of course it's happened. So the biggest way is accountability. You have union meetings, you have financial reporting requirements, and you have to pay attention. Go to a union meeting and look at the union reports and what were you spending the money on. And so abuses happen, but I don't think it's common or typical.
Okay. Are you familiar with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the ones here in Buffalo. So it's DC4 is who they work with here in this.
Yes.
And I've worked with them for my Apollo Alliance.
Yes, the DC4 is the one that we're working with, actually.
So I've worked with them that we do a project called the HEC project, Home Energy Conservation Kits. And we've worked with the Painters Union to go in and saying, we want to try to help people do weatherization, and we give them caulk guns and spray foam and door sweeps and things. How can we make your house for lower income homeowners or renters, and how can we make it more comfortable for you and hopefully save some energy? And the Painters Union has been part of pretty much every single one we've done for the last 12 years.
Wow.
So I've worked with building trades and other trades as well, whether it's carpenters. But for the most part, I've got nothing but good things to say with from that particular union. So I go back to the previous person that I worked with a lot was Dan Booty, who was in charge of the Painters Union. And I've worked with Bill Mayer, has done all of our HEC projects, and we've worked with other folks as well. So care about doing things right. So I also for Cornell teach about lead-based paint. So for my job as I teach in Monroe County for Rochester, that if you're going to scrape paint in a house built before 1978, you need to have this RRP, which is Renovation, Remodeling, and Painting certificate. And I teach that program for Monroe County Department of Health. And that's something that the Painters Union is very, strongly in favor of, trying to make sure they don't poison any of their members or
Yes.
families. And it doesn't take a lot of lead to poison people. So the Painters Union, having professionals get training and wearing the respirators and having that kind of protection, because if I'm working on a house as a DC4 painter that's in there that has lead-based paint, or a building that has lead-based paint, and I'm not aware of it, I bring the lead home on my clothes, you throw it in the laundry basket, and now you just poisoned your house and your car and your family. So that you have to be aware of those. And DC4, at least the Painters Union for IUPAT, they've been fantastic to deal with and work with, and they volunteer for the community. You'll see them on the telethons on TV, and the kids, and they're very active in trying to be part of the community, because they are part of the community. So it's important. The other thing about union members, according to the report from Russell Weaver out of Cornell, and the PPG, Partnership for the Public Good, came out with a report that says union members, at least in Buffalo, Niagara, where I'm from, report being happier with their standard of living compared to non-union members. They're happier with their lives than non-union members, and they feel more empowered to affect change. So they think they can make a difference, because you have not just me, it's us. We want to make a difference or a change. So,
all right, very good. I think I have another online question. Let's see here. How protected is an employee if the union fails to form? For example, are employees anyways protected from retaliation even after a union election, no matter the outcome?
Well, you're only protected in terms of what you have as a union to try to help you do that, or you have an attorney to try to sue for retaliation. So it does happen. I'm not going to tell you that it doesn't, so that there can be fears. It is extremely difficult to form a union on the first try. So if you're in a union organizing campaign, don't feel bad or upset if you're not successful, because a lot of the initial organizing drives don't necessarily win at the when they do the actual count for the election. Even after you get that election, it doesn't always lead to a first contract, because just because you have a union doesn't mean that the management ever has to say yes. So you could have no collective bargaining agreement. So you have no contract, but you have a union, and they can't seem to get any contracts. But people do sometimes get fired, and if your employer has hired the anti-union, union-busting law firms to try to persuade you, or union consultants to try to persuade you not to join a union, it's possible that they could choose to terminate those that were sympathetic to the union. It does happen. There is an avenue to get, a lawsuit and win back your back pay plus benefits for retaliation. And there's whistleblower acts, and there's some legal protections, but it usually means legal fees.
Okay, one more online question. Can dues increase or have additional union costs associated with joining?
Dues would increase as you get pay increases. So it's typically 2 hours of pay per month is what the typical or average is for unions. So that if you get a 10% pay increase, then the amount you're paying just went up for those 2 hours of pay, they go up. So your union dues would increase. But for the most part, they're limited by the Constitution unless you as the union vote to increase them. So only the union members could vote to increase the union dues. The union can't do that. The members have to vote for any changes. And for the case of the UAW, they voted to increase a little bit of their union dues because they were afraid they may have to go on strike, which they did. So they increased it a little bit, but I don't think it even went up to 3 hours. I think it was maybe 2.5 hours. They increased it slightly, but it wasn't this huge jump. So it's not, oh, now I got to pay $5,000 for this union fees. It's like, no, it's nowhere near that. It's a small amount that you're paying for your union dues, and almost always you're getting a lot more back in return for what you're paying for your dues.
Okay, I know maybe you already touched upon this. The union buster that came into our lab, he worked with a firm called LRI, which stands for Labor Relations Institute. Is this a firm that you've heard of? And what are they really being paid to do? And how much do these people typically get paid to do what they are doing?
No, I have not heard of the firm, and I don't look too closely into the individual firms. They probably get paid a fair amount because a lot of times they will hire attorneys to try to do some of this for the consultants so that they don't break the law. Some of them do break the law, but they break the law in a way where they don't get caught. I would say they're paying this group tens of thousands of dollars for trying to do this union busting. And sometimes they're affiliated with other political entities. So you have people that prefer the right to work, and it was the Koch brothers, one of them now deceased, that were in favor of trying to have the right to work states and trying to push the union busting agenda. And that's what happened in Michigan. It was part of the Rich DeVos and Jay Van Andel, for the people from Amway, tried to help switch and fund big things to be anti-union. So they may hire those for the political activities to try to persuade you from voting, because unions in the past historically have tended to vote more Democratic as opposed to Republican. But I think it was still, for the UAW, close to 40% voted Republican. So it's not 100% guaranteed you're going to vote for this or that, but they tend to have an impact on the voting booth, so they tend to get a lot of attention. So people may help pay for that union busting law firm to come in just to keep it from becoming a union, so that they may keep your district more Republican or more anti-union, so they will have support. So they sent people from all across the country down to Chattanooga, Tennessee, when Volkswagen was trying to have an election committee there, and it's the only Volkswagen plant in the world without a union is the one in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So you had the governor, you had Senator Bob Corker, and you had other folks saying, if you vote a union, you'll never get any money from the state. We'll give you no money here. We're going to block you, and anti-union, 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 and had people coming in from right to work states. And of course, you got to block these unions so they can attract people not for the good of the employees, but for their own political agenda. And that would be for the union consultants or the union busting law firms. It's not necessarily to help the workers, because the workers get to vote. You get to vote if you want a union or not. If you vote no, okay, you vote no.
Now, this question might relate to the topic of right to work laws. Some people in my lab have expressed reservations about being forced into joining the union if we win the election. Some of them feel like they might prefer to opt out of joining the union if it were to pass, that we'll have one in the workplace. People are having reservations with things like paying dues, since it's not something that they want in the first place. What is your take on people being forced into having to join the union and pay dues if it's something that they're just flat out not interested in the first place?
Well, in New York State, they don't have to join the union. So they don't have to join the union. They may have to pay what's called an agency fee, which is the collective bargaining related dues associated with being in the union. But you don't have to put a label on your shirt that says I'm union, and you don't have to join the union. You don't have to attend any union meetings. You participate in whatever amount you want. But if you get the benefits of having a vacation time and sick time or other collectively bargained agreement for your contract, then you would pay for what is associated with that. But you would not pay for any of the political activities or any of the other things that you're not in favor of. But in New York State, you have to do that. What's happening in the right to work states is it's called a free rider problem. Like PBS, if you want to watch Sesame Street on TV, I can watch Sesame Street whether I send my check to PBS or not. But if nobody sends that check to PBS, nobody gets to watch Sesame Street. So the people that benefit from it don't always pay for it. So in the right to work states, you have to voluntarily pay the union dues. And you have to remember that history of right to work was pretty dismal in terms of racist and other assorted problems. So people used that term not to make it sound like what it is, but they try to make it sound better than it is.
Okay, so if the union is approved in our workplace, how long does it take typically to get a contract together?
It can take a year or more to get a collective bargaining agreement. A lot depends on how much the union or the management wants to fight the union. Nothing having a union tells you that the management has to say yes.
Okay.
So getting a first contract can be extremely difficult for the union. That it's not easy, and sometimes the management will intentionally block you from getting any contract just so the union will fall apart in the meantime. So you get the union, you get the bargaining committee, and the management says, no, 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 you get nothing. And then after a year or two of that, the member said, you didn't do anything for us, we don't need you anymore. And it's like, oh, okay. So sometimes they will use those types of tactics. But most employers, after a while, will figure out that, no, we really do care about our employees. We really do think that we should treat them well. So if they wanted a union, they voted for one, I guess we will see what we can do, and let's see if we can work this out. And in most cases, they end up with a lot of benefits that they didn't realize they would have. So the employer will find out that their turnover goes down, their employee attitudes go up, employees become more professional, they feel more engaged or invested in the company because, oh, now I don't have to worry about getting fired tomorrow. Now I got a union or whatever. Hey, now I can actually buy a house. Now I can actually, maybe I can get that new car. Maybe I can do something where I'm not worried about losing my job in 5 minutes. So I'm not in constant fear. So it can help you relax.
I see.
And that can help them be more engaged at work and come up with new ideas. We don't think well under super stress. So helping your workplace with new ideas and new suggestions and new improvements, it usually will help having a union to feel more comfortable.
Okay. So I think I'm getting to the end of my questions here. This might be my last one, even if unless you might have other topics you want to touch upon. But we recently had a petition circled around the workplace asking people to sign something that essentially says that they do not want a union in the workplace. I think it was the thing that you were talking about, the petition to decertify a union in the workplace. The petition did receive a majority of signatures, and it was shown to both the union buster and the union representatives themselves. What do you think about petitions like this being circulated around the workplace? Like, is this something we should be concerned about, especially because the election hasn't even taken place yet?
Is it a concern? Yes. It means that the management is engaging and trying to block the union. And you have to remember that you have the legal right to join or not join a union. That's protected under the U.S. law, so that you have a right to vote. For getting to the election, you have an election schedule. That means you had to have more than 30% of the people sign an intent to or a willingness to vote for a union. So they get a chance to vote. So when you go to vote, whether they sign this other paper doesn't really make a bit of difference. It's not going to have a whole lot of legal weight. You have the NLRB has said, yes, we recognize that you have more than 30% signed voting cards for the union, so we will have an election. So whether they sign, you could have 65% saying, I don't want this union, here's my card and sign it and give it to you. Doesn't make any difference, because you get to go in your own little election booth and saying, I'm voting on my own with no pressure from my employer. Let me vote and see yes or no.
Okay.
And what you're doing when someone's in your face is different from when you actually sit down and vote. So a lot of times it can be a surprise at the end whether the union voted yes or no. Sometimes the union people from the union will say, oh yeah, I'm going to vote for the union. And then they go in the voting booth. They think, oh no, that might hurt my family. Maybe I won't. And the other times they keep telling the employer, no, I'm not voting for a union. And then they go in the voting booth and saying, you bet I'm voting for the union because it's going to help me. It's an individual choice. And the unions are set up to have a democratically elected free choice to vote yes or no. So vote yes or vote no is up to you, but you do get the chance to vote. And whether the consultants try to make you sign something doesn't make a whole lot of difference. You've got the vote scheduled. Go in there and vote what you think. Do your own research, vote your own state of mind. So that's what we have. The United States is, democratic republic. We're trying to have the right to vote. So let's go ahead and do that. I don't care if you vote union or not union, you vote for what's best for you and your families.
Okay.
That's all the union wants, is what's best for you and your families.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't know. Do you have any other points that you wanted to make, or any other statements? I guess.
My biggest statement is don't take my word for anything. Look on your own. Vote for your own conscience. So
Okay.
that's my perspective for what I do, and I share that. But I'm using statistics and using numbers from people that are professionals in doing that. So
Okay.
Bureau of Labor Statistics or other academic resources. And it's not just an opinion. There's a lot of people that have studied it, and vote what's good for you. That's what you need to do. Vote what's best for you and your family, and that's your choice. I can't make that decision.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, Art.
Well, thank you very
Yes.
much.
Yes, it's a pleasure.
Let me see if we can